That's me
Welcome
smiling.
to You literally are frowning into it. Okay.
It's my smile.
hmm
Mhm.
Welcome to the Spin Nation podcast, the podcast that slices through the noise to reveal the forces shaping Canadian perspectives. On today's episode, we talk about Carney's pivot on the digital services tax. And if the message to Canadians is still elbows up, or is it the start of Carney's elbows down era? I'm your host, Laurel, and welcome to my co host, Emmanuel. It looks like there are a lot of disappointed Canadians out there.
During the election, there was a lot of patriotism under the elbows up banner. But this has been spun a little bit topsy turvy since then. And we wanted to know what was the public response to Carney's decision to abolish the digital service tax to appease Trump.
Now, I admit I completely fell in love with the whole elbows up campaign. It was very organic. It evolved from Mike Myers, who I've always been a big fan on SNL. I loved the inside joke of it that he did. It worked for me. Did it work on you? Did you like it?
Well, I'm always wary whenever politicians try to appeal to emotions. That's not a strong point, but I did think it was smart politics at the time and a great way to lock arms in defense of Canadian interests.
Big surprise, Emmanuel was not emotional. And if anyone here who's listening who knows Emmanuel, they'll probably think that's a very authentic Emmanuel thing to say. Now, you say that, but you did go out and buy a Canadian flag and hang it outside our house. I mean, you're Quebecois. That's not exactly usual or typical for you. And we were just in Quebec, and I was surprised to see as many Canadian flags as there were hanging.
That's right. That's probably the first Canadian flag that I ever bought in my life. But I think in this case, there is a reason for it. And the rational and best way to defend ourselves against this change in US policy is to work together. So I think in this case, the emotional and the rational are quite entwined.
So, today's business question, we wanted to know what was the public response to Carney's decision to abolish the DST, the digital services tax, to appease Trump? And has he lost the support of his elbows up fans? Emmanuel, you took a look at the elbows up campaign. How did it look?
Just to refresh everybody's timeline a little bit here with what's been relevant to trade in the last few weeks. Around mid June, 15th, 16th, 17th, was the G7. Then everybody went away for a few weeks. There was the NATO meeting in Europe. And the week that Trump came back on June 25th, he tweeted his sudden break in trade negotiations on that Friday, saying that Canada was a bad partner and that he would cancel all negotiations because of the digital sales tax. Over that weekend, the Canadian government made a few statements saying they would be canceling the sales tax. And then, as is pretty typical of the Trump government, on Monday, there was the press secretary, Karen Levitt, and she made a briefing where she said that Canada caved on the DST and that negotiations would continue. So we looked at that data from the perspective of studying elbows up versus elbows down. We looked at it from the perspective of four different channels because that gives us an idea of what people are thinking from the left, like on Blue Sky, or from the right, which is a little more matched up to what happens on Twitter. And well, you can see our findings here. We have across most of these social channels, we have a peak around the time of the G7, a little bit of a murmur on the elbows down around that time. But it's not until that famous Trump tweet that elbows up go up again around June 25th. But at the same time, as everybody reacts to the cancellation of the DST, that's where we start seeing quite an increase of elbows down across all channels. Laurel, what does that make you think?
Well, I remember at the G7, I thought that Carney seemed like he was like in control and they're calling him the Trump whisperer. And it felt like that first pushback was like he had it. But then this pivot that he offered, and I think you see this on the 19th in June, and for those who are listening, there's actually a moment on Reddit where elbows down is more highly mentioned than elbows up. So it feels like this was the moment where Canadians were saying, wait a second, I thought we were talking tough, but it looks like you're now completely capitulating to what Trump wants. Isn't that the opposite of elbows up? So I think he started to lose some of the trust in the elbows up supporters that he had at that point.
Mm-hmm. The fact that Trump surprised everyone on that Friday with that tweet. It's very unusual for international negotiations to have your partners essentially negotiate via social. So it did make it seem a little bit like Carney had lost at least a little bit of control in that negotiation, especially after having set some target dates for closing negotiations.
Even with the elbows up, they're still present, let's say, in the social chatter, but I do suspect that it was elbows up question mark. So they're mentioning elbows up, but they're mentioning elbows up with a little bit of, are we still doing this? This doesn't feel like we're elbows up anymore.
Yeah, this is certainly the big question on everybody's mind. And we could definitely see that when you compare the coverage on Twitter, the ratio of elbows up to elbows down is actually much lower than on some of the other social networks. And that's what we would expect because a lot of the Carney opponents tend to be more on Twitter.
So let's talk a little bit about how the government handled this communication. And I want to read a little bit about the press release, which I think is contributing to the skepticism or I think the better word is uncertainty that Canadians were projecting following this pivot that Carney did on the DST. So this is what the official press release said. So they announced that they were going to do it in anticipation of a mutually beneficial comprehensive trade agreement with the United States. Then it says, blah, blah, blah. Canada's preference has always been a multilateral agreement related to digital services taxation. While Canada was working with international partners, including the US, on a multilateral agreement that would replace national digital service taxes, the DST was enacted to address the aforementioned taxation gap. Blah, 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 gobbledygook, gobbledygook, gobbledygook. And even more so than Champagne's tweet saying the rescinding the DST will allow the negotiations to make vital progress and reinforce our work to create jobs and build prosperity for all Canadians. So again, more nothing. Like it's a lot of nothing, like a nothing burger communication. So I feel like they really dropped the ball.
What was that? I think just I fell asleep while you were reading out these tweets.
Yeah. I mean, okay, I think they were referring to is the fact that the OECD has been working on a very multilateral approach to taxation across different countries, and these negotiations have been going on for a long time. Probably what they were referring to in this multilateral agreement that they reference, but how can they expect your regular Canadian to have any idea of the context that they're talking about? To me, this was the most risk averse, old school kind of calms, like the most bureaucratic calm, say nothing that I have seen in a long time. I think personally it was garbage.
And it's a big shift from the campaign, right? Where it was all elbows up and Canada is in a crisis and very strong, emotional, and gather around the flag language. And here it's bureaucratese and kind of sleepy and just not very interesting. Contrast that to Trump, who, complain as you might, at least one thing that he achieves is with his tweets is connecting with the audience and making very clear statements that you cannot have any any doubt as to what he's expressing.
And what they're doing is the old school kind of communications that you would use in a negotiation, international trade negotiation like this. You don't want to show your hand. Look, even if Carney is playing 4D chess behind the scenes, he is operating in the Trump communications ecosystem. And by the communication saying absolutely nothing, he has allowed Trump and the Trump supporters to define what the Canadian negotiation strategy or goals actually are. Now, even if the press release was essentially trying to say, look, the DST had maybe a short term goal with there's still a long term opportunity to achieve what we want to achieve, which is making sure these large tech companies pay their fair share in taxes. Well, why can't you just say that or something close to that instead of talking about multilateral agreements that are like, it's just, they're not communicating to people. They're communicating to a very, very small group of policy experts, but then they are leaving this vacuum for everybody else, and which is their voters. And I think it's pretty short-sighted.
Right. So it sounds like, this was a press release that was crafted to communicate, yeah, look, US negotiation team, here we go. We did, what we said we would. But while doing that, completely losing the thread when it comes to the Canadians, just regular Canadians who were expecting a fighter and are getting, somebody who's I'm not sure what's the right word, just stalling for time or trying to not say too much.
I think he's being too conservative personally. But so in this vacuum, let's look at our next little bit of data that we pulled. And in terms of who really influenced the conversation, and you mentioned before Carolyn Levitt, and I think you are right on there that she really is the real winner here in terms of influencing the conversation by introducing this concept that Carney caved. So I want to throw this up for people who are watching. But we actually tracked how often over that week Carney was saying Carney caves or Carney caved. And looking across social media and across media, there's this massive spike on June 30th when she came out with that. And she really painted the vision then. She has put this stamp of a caver on Carney because he was not effectively communicating what he was doing and why.
And let's look at the reaction on some of the Canadian political podcasts. We've got an example here from Moose on the Loose, where you can clearly see Moose is never a supporter of a Carney or Liberal government, but clearly not a fan here. He's actually got a theory that Carney dropped the tax. In today's episode, he mentioned it's possible Carney dropped the tax to help Brookfield. So this is an example of a reaction from the right, and then here's an example from the left. We've got Steve Boots literally using elbows down in his title page. So not a lot of support from either side of the conversation.
Definitely a bit of a stinker on the calm side for the Carney government. I think that they are really missing some opportunities to talk more. And I'm sure there are very experienced people advising them, no, we need to keep this quiet because we've got this bigger long-term strategy and we don't want to show your hand. I'm not saying that that doesn't make sense, but I'm saying by taking that approach, Canadians feel left down. I think that's the big thing is Canadians have been changing their shopping habits. They're not going to the US. When I go to the grocery store, oh wow, look at those beautiful blueberries. Up, no, can't buy them. Or those beautiful cherries. Up, can't buy them. Look, your mother didn't serve the cherries that she bought because she realized she bought them in the United States. She already bought them, but didn't feel she could serve them because of where they were from. So Canadians are making sacrifices, and I think if Carney needs to help us to feel like those sacrifices that we are making are for some greater good, and this absence of describing what's next? What does it look like? Why are we doing this?
So, Laurel, let's imagine for a second that you are making recommendation at the Prime Minister's office in terms of changing this communication strategy, making it a bit more active, a more targeted to the Canadian voter. What would you do differently?
First off, change the language that they're using. And I mean, this isn't just right now, but consistently they use vague, nothing key messages. So, meaningless key messages has been the Carney government's approach to comms since he first stepped into office. I was giving it a little bit of time because sometimes, well, you need to get the team set up, and maybe they don't have people in place yet to help define what that brand voice is going to be. But nothing has changed. I mean, they are still using this. We're helping Canadians achieve Canadian things, and no one's going to get behind that. So I think that's the first thing that I would be thinking about. The second thing I would be thinking about is how much more can we open that kimono, and recognizing that you can't show your hand, you can't open the kimono too far because you've got a strategy. This is a very delicate negotiation, as Carney himself has said, but there's got to be more to talk about than what they're doing. They are so closed-lipped, and that worked in the old school way of trade negotiations, but this is Trump world now. It is different, and I don't think that they are managing well. So they got to do a bit of a rethink. They have to be a little bit less risk averse. It's going to be, I'm sure, uncomfortable, especially for those who've worked in government and in trade negotiations for decades. They might be like, isn't how it's done. Well, it's not how it's done at all in Trump land. So what is the new way to do it with a president that we're currently working with?
I'd agree with that. Now, one thing I would add to that is Trump is looking essentially for a good show. He's looking to manage the White House and foreign policy a little bit like you would if you were in the ring in the World Wrestling Federation. He's actually looking for an opponent that's going to fight back. So if you're playing 4D chess and you're Mark Carney, what you got to prepare here is a strategy where you set up a good fight that Trump is going to enjoy and it's going to put on a good show for him and for his for the voting public in America. But the reality is, you let him win the headline, but you or us in Canada win under the headline, where it gets really complicated and all those little bullet points in your trade agreement. That's where we need to win, and we need to give Trump the ability to pretend, "Woohoo! I won the wrestling match against Carney. I'm the smartest. I'm the best."
Of course, he loves the win. He loves to announce these trade agreements.
More than the win, he wants a show. He
He
wants
does,
a TV
yes.
show,
He
right?
loves.
But again, we got to play 4D chess, give him a win in the headline, but win further down in the document and who gets paid and where the money flows.
Yeah, and that's the part that's not happening right now. It's we're letting him define the headline, fine, and then there's nothing.
But we're not even giving him a fight, really. I think that's why they went in with the Carney Caves, because he didn't give them anything to play with.
It seemed like there was a bit of a fight at first after when he came out and said, "Oh, Canada's so difficult." I think people kind of liked liked the fact that Trump thinks we're difficult, and because that was the promise, right? It's going to be elbows up, and then I'm going to be a tough trade negotiator. Pick Carney over Polyev. Carney's going to be the one who's going to be tough to negotiate with Trump. And now they've caved to the one thing that we wanted. But
Well,
if
yeah, it's the disappointment, right? Imagine you're on the wrestling ring and you're challenging your opponent. You're saying, "Come over here. You're difficult. You're the bad guy. Blah blah blah. I'm going to fight you." And then nobody shows up on the ring.
look, we don't have the inside, we're just speculating and guessing about the negotiation strategy that's underway. And if they always intended to pull on the DST, who knows, right? Or they're saying let Carney have his show right now and have his win. We were always going to pull back on the DST anyway because we knew there's something else was going to be coming at a multilateral level in the near future that's going to fill this. So it's no big loss to Canada ultimately in the end. I think that's what that press release was trying to say. Of course, it didn't really say that in language that anybody is really going to understand. So We're just left kind of sitting here eating, looking for the more expensive produce from other parts of the world because we're not buying American. Um, and I feel like we're being left hanging by Carney right now. That's my personal takeaway from this.
Yeah, both, and like I'm going to keep arguing, both Trump and the Canadian public feel like they've been let down here. They're itching for a fight. And yes, it's tough for us to come up with a scenario where we do go into that fight and come out ahead. But both the Canadian public and Trump are looking for that spine.
I did look on we don't have the TikTok full data, but I did look at this conversation on TikTok and comment. There was over 1,600 comments on the CBC where they were just reporting the whole thing about caving and on the DST. And it was mostly Americans and Canadians essentially being nationalistic at each other. Well, we don't need you Americans. Oh, we're going to take over you Canadians. Oh, forget you Americans. You got nothing. Oh, we've got healthcare. Like it was more the sort of national pride, patriotic battle between Americans and Canadians was what was playing out in the comments. So to your point, Canadians want to be seen and we want to feel like we're not a big pushover because the way that Trump talks about the country with the whole 51st state and Governor Trudeau, we want to demonstrate that we are not just going to bend over. And this does feel like that's exactly what happened. Even if it was the right decision, and I'm not saying it was not the right negotiation decision, it probably was the right decision. But explain that. Well, that is going to be it for us today on this topic. Am I still elbows up? My elbows are not quite up. I'd say they've lowered to halfway. I'm not quite down. I'm in the middle. So, Carney, get my elbows back up again.
Yeah, maybe it's time to think about a pile driver.
A pile driver. Oh, you mean from like the wrestling?
Yeah.
Well, like a pile driver like that?
Yeah. It's a wrestling match. This is what it is. It's all for show.
I would prefer a body slam.
No.
More finality to a body slam or like a, what is it? A clothes
Spin?
No,
Clothesline.
Clothesline. That's it. A clothesline. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this episode 9. If you haven't yet followed us on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. Please share and refer. It means so much to us for your support. Also, rate if you can, like. These are really things that help get our content discovered. Thank you, as always, husband Emmanuel.
Lovely wife, Laurel.
See y'all next time.
Until next time.